Welcome to As the Story Grows. I'm Brian Patton. Today we welcome Thy Will Be Done frontman Jay Costa to the podcast. Thy Will Be Done released Pillar of Fire back on September 13th. Jay talks about the tradition of using biblical imagery in metal, connecting with Stillborn Records, the long and difficult road that it took to finish Pillar of Fire, the inspiration for the artwork, and more. It's always a blast connecting with new people about music, and this was a super fun chat with Jay. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of As the Story Grows. If you're brand new to the podcast, I would love it if you subscribed to the podcast on your listening platform of choice. We're releasing 3 episodes every week at the moment, so you never know when you'll find an awesome new band. You can find links to our Discord server where you can come hang out with our podcast community. You can sign up for the mailing list, or you can support the show financially over on Patreon. Enjoy today's chat with Jay Costa from Thy Will Be Done.
I just wrapped up another interview, so I apologize to make you wait, man.
Oh, it's all good. It's 1 minute. It's just no worries.
All right.
no problem. All right, we just finished up another interview. So how can we be more interesting than what you just did?
Oh no, it'll be interesting already.
It'll be, yeah. Well, good morning. Thanks for hanging out.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's Brian, right?
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah, man. Glad to have you here. Are you currently up in Rhode Island still?
Yeah, I'm a Rhode Island guy. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy Rhode Island.
Yes. What's the weather like up there currently?
Right now, it's a little overcast.
Yeah. Nice.
How about yourself? Where are you based out of?
DC.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Where it is also overcast. It's great.
I've got some good friends down there.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good place to grow up. I moved away. I thought I'd never move back, and then I did.
Funny how that works, right?
Yeah. I was like, I'm never moving back, and here I am.
Done.
Yeah.
There's nothing there for me. I'm never coming back.
Maybe I will. I think I've been to Rhode Island once. We did a road trip when my daughter was young, and we drove through Rhode Island, but it was not a long stay. So
it's a small state, so
yeah. It was. It is. What was growing up like?
Great, actually. I loved it. We had access to everything. I mean, Boston wasn't far at all, so we could, Massachusetts real close, and so we had Providence, which was a great city to grow up in. Great music scene at the time in the '90s, in early 2000s, and then even Boston, same thing. Rhode Island was great because we had beaches, but we also had forests.
Yeah.
We had our own unique history. For the longest time, smallest state with the longest name. They dropped it in 2020, so now it's just Rhode Island. But a lot of unique history in Rhode Island.
Yeah. Does being in Rhode Island, do you kind of view the music scene twofold as part of a larger New England scene, but also Rhode Island as its own thing?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Especially in the 90s and late 90s, early 2000s, it was especially evident that there was the Boston scene and then there was the Providence scene, and Rhode Island as a whole was so different. Growing up, there was out of the Newport area, you had really cool bands like Verbal Assault, which were cool early hardcore bands coming up. But a lot of the bigger New York and even some of the DC hardcore bands were actually coming up to Rhode Island to record. So there was this early influence of some of these iconic hardcore bands and some of the crossover bands that influenced Rhode Island. I think that wouldn't have happened if they didn't have the recording studio. Yeah,
that's cool. What got you into music?
Oh gosh, definitely my parents. That's the big one for me. Growing up, my mom and dad always listening to music, especially my mom. She loved music, and there was always music playing. She was always singing, always dancing, and so my mom's biological father passed when she was 15.
Okay,
and so my grandmother remarried. So her stepfather, when they married with my grandmother. My uncle was born as a product of that. And so my uncle was younger than my mom. and just 15 years older than myself. So he was a very early introduction to music, playing guitar, showing us. My brother, I have an older brother, and he'd show us a lot of cool music.
Yes.
I had older cousins, so that really helped. And my brother just listening to like Black Sabbath all the time and Metallica and a lot of hair metal too. And so it was just like early introduction to like all music, not just listening, but then also playing music, playing guitar.
Yeah.
It was just, it was great. And then wanting to start bands. And then, I used to play guitar and sing. And then, eventually just left the guitar off stage and just kept singing,
Yeah. Did you leave the guitar just because it was easier just to focus on vocals, or were you kind of rubbish?
No, it was interesting because like some of my favorite heroes were like James Hetfield, Max Cavalera, and they were like, guitarists and vocalists. And like, that's, I could do both. It was fine. But then we started like, I still write music too, even some of the newer stuff I help out with, but it's, it was interesting where I didn't feel so anchored. We wrote a song in like the very late stages of the last band that Will Be Done turned into, where I was just on vocals, and it was just liberating where like I could actually like, run around, interact with people and not feel so anchored. So it was a no-brainer at that point.
Yeah. There is something like, like Hetfield, Metallica, those are great bands, but there was something about like that frontman who's just unhinged and can interact with the crowd differently. And
absolutely. Like, I can't imagine Bruce Dickinson being stationary, like stuck behind a microphone stand. Like, nope, not happening.
Yeah.
Greatest frontman of all time, just like stuck in the middle there.
Yeah. Yeah. How did That Will Be Done form? I mean, just out of other bands?
It was the original band was Cobalt. It was Kobalt, and for years, and I was playing guitar and singing and doing a lot in the Rhode Island and Massachusetts and New York scene. And then it was just I had this desire, this drive to like be in a band and make music, because I grew up listening to music. And for me it was I know it's so cliche, but everyone says it, but it was a form of therapy, and you didn't realize it at the time. It was a way for me to actually like make sense of feelings and emotions that I didn't, have any other outlet for. And this just seemed to make sense, and it felt good to listen to music. And there was definitely a catharsis when you were, able to like write your own music that definitely sucked at the time, and you had no idea, but you're like, it's the coolest thing in the world. And it's garbage when you listen back, but I'm glad for that garbage. I'm grateful for that garbage, because I still identify with that kid there, because that's the same reason why I still make music today. And so I'll revisit those tapes every now and then, just as a reminder, and keep myself in that, one toe in that, because I think that's part of that divine lineage of like who you are and who you're becoming at all times. But essentially it came out of just wanting to be in a band and play music with my friends, and being the founding member of That Will Be Done and the only original member. It's great though, because like Kurt's been with me the longest in this lineup, and Kurt's been with me almost 20 years now at this point. And the band's almost 20 years old, but he's been with me like 18 and a half years. And then Eric, our original bass player, who left 15 years ago, is now back in the band, which is awesome. We've been friends since we were, right out of high school. We became friends, and he's my best friend. So it's cool to have him back in the band. So just friends getting together, making music.
And back in the day, the scene was so different, where it's like you could be a part of the local scene, and like even if your music was rubbish, there's still this like validation of like people coming together to mosh and enjoy your music, even if it's trash, right?
Right. Even if it's absolute garbage. And as much as you say you're not sounding like another band, oh my gosh,
definitely do.
And I cringe. I go, ooh. Oh boy, was that
evident? For sure. What was the inspiration for the name?
Gosh, so we were changing the name because the style of the music and the songs were changing. This is like 2004, and I remember we're just kind of all gathered around, and we're like kind of like trying to figure stuff out. And I remember distinctly thinking, I was like, man, I know that metal has always had this, like, I think back at like Black Sabbath, I think of bands like Exodus, I think of bands like Testament, and I'm like, Thy Will Be Done. It just sounded metal. It sounded epic enough, and it felt like it fit the sound and the tone, if that makes sense. It just like, it clicked. And then when I offered that up to the guys, it was like, wow, that is actually pretty epic, and then of course there was always the worry, like, oh, people are going to think, we're a religious band, and say, well, hey, which is fine. If somebody, it's, we think, that's a personal choice. It's a personal journey, but we're a secular band, but it's no different than the Exoduses of the world or the Testament.
Right.
Avenged Sevenfold, Genesis. There's so Metal Church. Walls of Jericho. There are plenty of awesome bands with these like biblical names, it's just timeless. So it just stuck.
Yeah. Well, I always think of like Trouble, like, it's like they were just like, what's metal as fuck? The Bible. So like we'll just write songs about that. People are like, they're a Christian band. They're like, no, it's just they're chopping people's heads off in here. Why wouldn't we not write about it?
It makes for some epic inspiration lyrically and aesthetically. Allegorically, they're beautiful books. The Torah is a beautiful collection of books. And as far as like the New Testament too, for a lot of people, just for literary purposes alone, even if someone, even as I have friends that are atheists that have read the Bible, that just, the allegory within the stories are timeless. And then you go back even further and you look at like the Epic of Gilgamesh, which predates it. And, pre-cataclysmic civilizations had very similar stories that have been passed on allegorically. So it's fascinating how stories have lasted for so long.
Yeah. How'd the band get connected with Stillborn? I assume just the connection of the New England scene. And
yeah, it was interesting. So our lead guitar player at the time, Rob Gill, good friend of mine, love that man. He was working with Jamie on this project. Well, he had worked with Hatebreed on Perseverance and a couple other things. He did a lot of like drum editing, and he worked kind of in tandem with Zeus on a few things. And so Jamie had this project he was working on, and Rob was engineering all the pre-production stuff. That project was at the time called, I think it was like, I don't know, Crowbreed. And then it turned into Kingdom of Sorrow. And so Jamie was putting out this compilation album, if I remember correctly. And Rob had told him, hey, my band's got, some tunes. And then so we ended up getting a song on one of the compilations. Jamie dug it. And at the same time, we were doing pre-production at Silverbolt Studio with our good friend Greg. And we were going to be putting out an EP. So we're just kind of like doing some pre-pro tracking. And Jamie actually came down and listened to some of the new tunes. And he said, I'd put out a record for you guys. And that was kind of like the beginning of it. Like, oh, okay. So he put Cobalt on a few shows, and then we had changed the name, and then he approved of the name change as well. And he really enjoyed the name Thy Will Be Done. And then, and then he took us out on tour. He put out the first record, Wasn't Is to Come, 2007. It had been recorded for a full year. Yep. And then, he took us out with Hatebreed. We did some stuff with them, and he opened a lot of doors for us. He really did. He went to bat for us, and then it just kind of like morphed into that. We met a lot of other great people, like Des Afar from Devil Driver, who also, another great dear friend of mine, opened a lot of doors for us as well too. And, that was kind of like the beginning of Stillborn. We did 2 records with Stillborn, and 2007's Wasn't Is to Come, in 2009's In Ancient of Days. Yeah.
Talk to me about, this record's been a long time coming. First single came out in 2020. It seems like tracking has been happening for years. Is it just like, and there were medical issues with members of the band, is that just like the toll of like life taking precedence over the band?
Yeah, man. It's we've always been an independent band, first and foremost. So for us, it's about the art, it's about the expression. And we do things for ourselves first. So we're not necessarily like under the gun trying to meet a label's requirements, and we've turned down record contracts, and we choose to do what we do based on why we do what we do. And along with that, there is all of life's challenges. We've also always had full-time jobs. So when we'd go on tour, we'd have to take a leave of absence or like use vacation times or whatever. So we've always been a working class band, full-time, touring heavily. full-time jobs, coming home to, sometimes working from the road if we could. But in the mid 2000s, it wasn't as common to work from the road. It was a lot different. So what protracted the recording process was we had a lineup change. At our peak at end of 2013, we come off the heels of the success of the Temple EP, the success of like catching the attention of James Hetfield, playing with Metallica. We're doing these really much bigger North American tours, went out with like Trivium, Devil Driver, and our lead guitar player he was getting married, so he was going to be leaving the band. He wanted a completely different lifestyle. Yeah. Our bass player also left. So now 2/5 of the band just exits, and it's myself, Kurt, and Waterman left with, okay, what do we do? And at the time, we had a recording that was already underway to be the follow-up to Temple. We actually completed that recording. Chris finished his guitar parts, even though he wasn't going to be in the band. He finished his parts. He left. We got another bass player, and for a short period of time, we had another lead guitar player, which ends up being current lead guitar player. But then he left. Touring was going to be hard for everybody, and we ended up scrapping that record. We just said, this doesn't really represent who we are. And we hit a real low point in 2014 and 2015. It was kind of rough. So then we just started to write and record as a band. And as we're tracking at the end of 2015 for this new record, at that time, our drummer had cardiac arrest. Yeah. He was in a coma and survived, luckily. And it's like less than 7% survival rate, but luckily he survived. So yeah, as you can imagine, it took some time for him to get to a point where he was okay. We had done some runs where we had our friend Jay Fitz from Overcast fill in on drums, did some tours with him and some other shows. And so it took some time. And then that record we were writing ended up turning into something. Matt Marcel ends up joining the band as our lead guitar player. We finished tracking stuff. Matt left the band. So now we're kind of like, what the heck, man? Like odds are against us. What is happening? It was just, you can imagine when the wind's taken out of your sails, you're just like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
So Chris rejoins the band. We end up reworking a lot of those songs, tracking, retracking. So this is essentially like this album, while it's been 10 years in the making, it's like, it's not the record that we were working on way back when. It wasn't one in the middle. It's what was supposed to be, and we're convinced. And but there's a lot of heartache on this between medical stuff. I lost my mom. Waterman lost his mom. In that time between the last EP and this record, I got married. I got divorced. Waterman got divorced. But then there's also all the positive stuff too. Like Kurt's got married. He's a dad now. Chris got married, and this record was coming out, and our bass player, Cody, he actually exited the band. And now Eric Tavares, our original bass player, is back in the band. But we're all family, so it's this like revolving door, and we make music for ourselves. Yeah. We make the music that we'd want to listen to, and everything else is just kind of gravy on top if people dig it. So long story short, we've been through a lot of shit.
Yeah.
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 But it shows in the music. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of triumph. There's a lot of energy that got documented on this record. And I'm convinced there's a reason why like people are resonating with it in such a positive way.
Yeah. Yeah. From 2012 to now, the music industry there's been a complete shift. I mean, recording has changed completely. Were there things that, as you're preparing to self-release this album, that you had to like research, or it's just like, okay, this thing we had planned is no longer going to work? Or
oh yeah, 100%. Like in 2012, so we started our own record label, and we had worldwide distribution. In 2012, we put out Temple, and we made some waves as an independent metal band. And I'll be honest with you, it's a very tight knit community in the metal world. And so what I mean by that is labels, managers, agents, everybody who knows everybody. So that kind of works. And if you're not part of like those circles, you're not really seen, and the perception is you're not as successful. Whereas there's a lot of success all around us. There's a lot of great independent artists out there that choose the path of independence. And we've been very successful at it in the regards of like, we're doing what we want to do the way we want to do it. And in 2012, I knew everything, like the back of my hand, how to put out an actual compact disc, get it in stores, because it was still a thing back then. We hit like a thing called Heat Seekers chart, in geographic regions, meaning it was a top selling CD, and all that changed.
Yeah.
So I reached out to a dear friend of mine who he was working for the distribution company that we had back then with our label, and our label is Ion Lion Recordings. And so when it came time for this, now there's streaming platforms, and that's all it is. There's, you're talking pennies on the dollar for when people listen to your music. So what's your return on investment? And it's not that we're doing this for money, but you can't just fork over all this money and not have any kind of return, but that's the name of the game. So you have to crunch numbers. You have to be careful. And so you kind of partner up with like-minded individuals and see who you can learn from. And it's humbling. And I love to learn. I absolutely love a challenge in learning new things. And I learned a ton on this one. And, it's weird because now you almost have to be a content creator first before you can be a musician. And that's a whole other topic. That's a whole other podcast. And but it's interesting. So we've never wanted to lose sight of being, musicians first and being artists, so that's that we keep that front of mind.
Yeah. The streaming side of things, it's like you carve out your niche and those people are going to buy vinyl, CD, cassette, whatever, along with band t-shirts and see the band live. And it's just like, you hope that offsets, or the discovery through streaming leads to those other things. Like, that's the hope. Right? Yeah.
right. And for us, like we do now, this record is entirely in-house. So our guitar player, Kurt, he engineered the Temple EP, but Zeus mixed that. Mm-hmm. Well, Kurt engineered this album, and Kurt and Chris, our other guitar player, Chris Robinson, mixed this album. So everything was done in-house, and mastering went to our good friend George, who's like a sixth member of the band anyway, and he mastered the recording. Always good to have an extra set of ears outside the band to kind of get it just right. And all the album artwork, all the single artwork, I take care of all the graphics for that. So everything's truly in-house.
Album's called Pillar of Fire. What led to that title?
So it's interesting. So for those who don't know, there's actually within the CD for the Temple EP, I had embedded a code. It's encrypted. It's within the actual liner notes of the CD, and you need a key to actually decipher what's in there.
Okay.
And for those who have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, are able to figure it out, there's a puzzle that's been going on since our first album. Okay. So it ties into everything.
Okay.
Yeah. That, and it made sense for this one to be Pillar of Fire because of everything that we've been through, that even though that we were going through what seemed like the darkest period of time for us as a band and all these different dark periods in our personal lives and collectively, there's still always a beacon there. And that fire can be seen esoterically in a lot of different ways. Fire can create and it can destroy. It can burn away a lot of things that you don't need. And it can also cook for you, and it can provide warmth and light for you. So fire through antiquity, even through, the earliest form of civilizations, fire has always played a very pivotal role for humanity. And fire is necessary. And it's one of those key moments in time where for us, it was time for us to really allow that fire within us to come out.
Talk to me about your inspiration for the artwork outside of just a literal pillar of fire.
Right on. Yeah, absolutely. So it's a literal pillar of fire. Right. So allegorically, there's a lot of stories we talk about, through antiquity. And again, to the point, if anyone who can do some research, go through antiquity and learn about how fire has been there for a long time for different civilizations and people throughout time, and what it can represent to people allegorically, and what fire does and represents. So for the artwork, that the clouds in the background is actually a photograph I took in my backyard of the sky this one day where I was having a moment after my mom had passed away, and I was just kind of thinking about life and thinking about just things in general. I suppose I get contemplative at times, as most lyricists do.
Yeah.
We kind of communicate with the world because we're awkward, so we write it down. And I'm a visual person as well, and I just had this moment where I was looking up, and it's literally from my phone on my the camera on my phone, and I just looked up and I snapped this picture, and something about it. So obviously I tweaked it, and fast forward, a few years later, I'm thinking about the Pillar of Fire. And like when I finally, there's a lyric in one of the songs on the album, and I was like, okay, I think this is going to be the name of the record, because I proposed 2 album titles to the guys, and everyone landed on Pillar of Fire. So I said, okay, it's going to be Pillar of Fire. And I remembered that picture, and I said, okay, let me pull this up and tweak it a little bit. And now we're just going to get some fire. And there's some fire stacks in Western Mass. And it's manipulated a bit, but basically I love doing that sort of thing. And then you just kind of overlay it, but it just made sense, and it needed to represent what the album was about.
Nice. This album came out on Friday. Because everybody has jobs and are working, what's the plan for the band going forward, either the rest of this year or looking ahead to 2025?
Yeah. So, we've already done a couple one-offs. We've done some festivals. Touring's not completely out of the question. It's just touring in 2024, going into 2025 is a completely different animal than it was in 2010, even 2015. It's a completely different game.
Yeah.
And, there are people who still come to shows, but it's less people nowadays. But people still come out. Yeah. But they reserve that time for, those big acts that are coming around, and they're saving up and they're working their jobs and they're spending their hard-earned money. They can't really go to every concert that comes around, and it's totally understandable. So they reserve it if, hey, Lamb of God's coming around, Pantera, Metallica coming around, and I get it. So we have to be strategic about the shows that we play. Again, it's a young person's game too. I'll be honest with you, and that's the truth. We're not in our 20s anymore. We're not in our 30s anymore, but that doesn't mean that we can't tour. I mean, we're playing the best we've ever played, and our drummer, for a man who survived cardiac arrest, I'll tell you what, he's in the best shape of his life. And, he's getting the right exercise. He's changed his diet. He's got this fortitude that is unparalleled. And it's just, again, we're playing the best we've ever played. And, you look at all these other bands that have been doing it for a long time. Look at Metallica. I just saw them a couple months ago, and they sounded amazing. They're playing amazing. So it's a state of mind. So touring's not completely out of the question. It just needs to make sense for us logistically and financially too, to be real. If people aren't buying the music, you got to supplement income somehow, Yeah.
It seems like there's a resurgence in interest in heavy music, but whether that's translating to live shows or the type of live shows, it's
right. And it changes depending on genre too. I think it's fantastic. I love seeing Knocked Loose rise to where they are at right now. And and again, it's like if someone had said like, oh, Knocked Loose is going to be, playing with Slipknot and doing these things, well, when you start talking about management, you start talking about agencies, it makes sense. But from the outside perspective, people would be like, that's not going to happen. But I think it's just wonderful. I think it's great. And you've got purists in every genre who get so mad. But at the end of the day, if it moves you, it moves you. That's all that matters. And they're a solid band. Yeah. And to me, I'm a fan of people having goals, achieving them, and being successful. I love seeing people succeed. That's what it's about, because life is so darn short and precious that we only ever know the first date. We'll never know the second date, but there's a dash between those dates, and we're responsible for that dash. We have to make it count.